Everyone. Welcome to the Minds Exchange Session 2. My name is Shropa, and I'll be the chair for this session. I'll briefly describe how the Minds Exchange session will run. So this will be a virtual poster-style session where we have invited individuals from around the world to share with us an initiative, experience, or idea. So these presenters will give 3-minute presentations that will each be followed by a 3-minute question period. And once all presenters are done, we'll also open the floor for a general question and discussion period. We have 2 breakout rooms today, one for creative thinking and one for interventions and skills.
I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker, which is Magdalena, and she will start off with our first poster for today.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Yeah, whenever you're ready.
When I'm ready. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Lovely. Great stuff. So, hi, everyone from London in the UK. So my poster has to do with a framework that I call the Grid. And it's a framework that's kind of come out of my work with academics in the first instance. When I saw them sort of being very stressed. So a lot of the sort of things that the previous speaker was talking about, high stress, high burnout, lots of anxiety, worry, the sorts of things that are kind of common to science that I've experienced in my PhD and then later on, and that I saw people experience at different stages. And basically, the framework kind of began by recognizing that for a long time we've been talking about life and work balance, and sort of there's lots of research literature about that. But one of the things I've noticed about first academics, then researchers, then postdocs, and then PhD students during COVID, is that there are like kind of 2 other quadrants that don't get actually talked about very much, and I've called them self-care and career. And when it comes to the nervous system, so I'm a neuroscientist by my training and my PhD, but I now work as a psychologist and a therapist with people, and do a lot of consulting work around this space of well-being and mental health and higher education. And basically, what I see is that the self-care quadrant and the career quadrant tend to re-energize and sort of put back a lot of the energy that life and work, the sort of day-to-day things that we do, tend to kind of expand. So if you think of it almost like a bank account, that's sort of what happens. And so I've called this framework like a 2x2, a grid, kind of mostly because it's kind of like a mathematical sort of, 4 areas. But the framework works at different levels. So at a very global level, for example, after COVID, a lot of people that I saw had, really a lot of difficulties, anxieties, potentially depression. So the framework could be used in like a post-it note on a day-to-day basis to kind of make sure that you're doing 1 or 2 tasks that kind of balance you out. And the idea is that you're balancing out your nervous system a little bit more. And so it's not all skewed towards maybe one quadrant. And one of the things I've seen certainly in science is that, science is often passion driven. So there can be a kind of propensity to make one of those quadrants kind of explode at the expense of the others. And that is often how the initial imbalance is kind of set into really kind of poor habits and make things really difficult. So we use the grid in a way of kind of setting goals so people can kind of, think about what they actually want to be well and to flourish across the 4 quadrants. But then we can use it in a sort of like weekly basis in terms of developing like the various things you want to do. So I, for example, have ADHD. So I do like to do multiple things. But they can be difficult to keep track of and actually keep those deadlines or keep kind of getting to those points where you get, let's say, the payoffs that other people care about. And so in the grid, we kind of have this really nice method of being able to kind of put things in there, but then we work to our own energy. So we basically pick the things we want to do from that menu a bit by energy and by task that we like doing. And then we collect points by basically highlighting the things we've done. So over time, it's kind of a way to sort of combine, people who are really good at the meta level picture, like they're great at this sort of, big level, setting goals, having visions and doing things, but maybe not so good at the day-to-day implementation. And equally, some people, are kind of good at the day-to-day stuff, but they kind of lose the big sight of where's it all going. So the grid kind of works at these multiple magic levels and kind of helps you combine the different elements. And, we've been trying it out with all sorts of people here in the UK and also, people in the States and in Turkey and in Portugal. And it's been really working. So at this stage, I'm kind of just wanting to get this out to more researchers, more students, and more people who can find it useful. So there's a lot of stuff on the website that is free, like blogs and films and techniques to kind of get it out there and to help people use it. So that's all I really wanted to say. I hope that's under the 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? So you can also type them in the chat. And I believe if you just type it to everyone, it should just go into our break room. So that is okay as well. If not, we can also just move on to the next speaker. And then if you have any questions, we can just go through them at the end because we have that extra 15-minute period as well. So speak. Okay, and now we'll move on to Diana.
Yes, so hello everyone. My name is Diana and I am from Latvia. So currently it's already past midnight over here, so I'm a bit tired, but I hope I will be okay. So I am really grateful to be here today and to talk to you guys about our initiative. But before I do it, I would like to give you a little background about the academic environment in my home country. So we do have some problems here. According to OECD data, we have the smallest number of PhD degree holders in the whole European Union. And obviously, there are some reasons for it. And actually, I had the privilege to personally experience what some of those reasons might be because I used to be a PhD student in the Latvian higher education system myself. So I formally graduated. I am a PhD candidate, but I was never able to defend my thesis. And back then, when I realized that it was time to quit academia because it would never work, first of all, I didn't have a plan B, and I was supposed to be a scientist because that had been my dream for forever. And then I had this huge identity crisis because of that, and I was not able to fully recover from that experience up until some years later when we had this idea that hey, we should do something about it and we should start changing things around. And then this concept of social entrepreneurship just popped up in my mind. And we liked it and we went with it. And so we funded our social enterprise dedicated to supporting early career researchers in Latvia. And so social enterprise in Latvia, it is a legal term. So we even have like a law dedicated to social entrepreneurship that dictates what we can and cannot do. And currently we are we are taking our baby steps. We are still in the proof of concept phase. So there's still a lot of trialing and erroring for us, a lot of learning. And the way we work, the way we operate is we have this impact model where we work directly with the early career researchers, and we do that by offering them trainings and seminars. At first, we were primarily focusing on communication skills and science communication, but now we are shifting our focus more towards the mental health and well-being because we truly see that this is something that we have to work on. And on the business side of things, we are cooperating with the higher education and research institutions. And through them, we are gaining access both to the funding and to our primary target group. And the main advantage of this model is definitely the flexibility and the autonomy, because we are a separate entity, and as such, we can basically do whatever we want. We are not restricted by any one organization, any gatekeepers, any organizational policy. So we are free to work however we see fit. However, one of the main challenges that we are encountering is this huge mental health stigma that is still very prevalent in Latvia. People often don't even understand how to talk about mental health and what it even is, especially people in STEM. You are talking to a person and you see that they're struggling, but they often lack that vocabulary to express their discomfort, and that's a huge problem. And so we really see that this is something that we have to focus on, and we have to raise awareness around that, around mental health and well-being, and to educate people. So that's our primary focus for now. So yes, basically that's it from my part. I think I have used up my time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I will actually start off with one myself. So you mentioned that you are making the shift towards mental health initiatives. I was wondering if if that was how new that was, and if there's anything that you've done recently in that space that you can kind of share as an example.
Yes, so well, I have started to create seminars regarding that, to talk to people about, let's say, about career aspects and how different research environments and especially for young researchers, relationship with the supervisor seems to be very, very important.
Yes.
And how that can impact your mental health. And actually, something that I've been trying to stress really a lot is that it's actually, if a person is struggling, it might not necessarily be his or her fault. Like there is something wrong with the person. Oftentimes, and I would say in most cases, there is something wrong with the environment. And when you are in that position, you don't even know that, right? When you are, I remember myself even, I had no idea that it was not my fault, that there was something wrong with the environment and with my supervisors. So that's something that I've been really trying to get across, so that people feel at least at ease. Maybe we cannot fix their problems right away, but we can at least help them not think about themselves, that there's something wrong with them.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. Well, yeah, if no one else has any questions, we can move on to the next speaker. Thank you so much, Diana. That was a great presentation. And we'll move on to Geraldine.
Sorry, Geraldine, you're muted.
Thank you for that. Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from Ireland this evening, and I'm delighted to be here with you. It is almost 11 p.m., or at least it's getting closer to 11 p.m. Can't say that I've worked this late recently, but I bring to you the personal development module that we've developed in the Technological University of the Shannon in Ireland. We are the only social care work programme in the country that provides personal development for our students for 4 years of their study, and that involves 2-hour lecture weekly and 1-hour group work weekly across the 4 years. So I know my poster slide looks a little bit stark, but what the personal development is trying to do for the students is connect that mind-body piece, which is something that we found in my research with 41 participants, that isn't always present for the workers that are working in the front line with vulnerable people. And also you can see the picture of the hands. It's almost like they're being pulled in so many directions. And we discovered that without personal development learning, the students or the graduates burn out quicker than those that have had the personal development, because the findings showed us that the participants were likely to assertively say that they'd had enough, that they really couldn't deal with another client, or that they weren't the right person to work with the client. So I'll just pop in the chat the definition of personal development so that you can see what that is exactly that I'm talking about. Now, from my own research, I defined it really as a purposeful commitment to form a more truthful relationship with the self and others, whilst attempting to courageously overcome the fears and struggles associated with that commitment in order to bring the best version of the self to personal and practice life. Now, what we found was, and why I say courageously, it's a very scary place to be. A lot of our students are 18, 19 years old, up to the mature. We've even had a student 70 years of age. But the difficulty is they're scared to share themselves. And the danger is if they don't do this work in college, they will go out and leak some of their stories. We are, I suppose, really conscious of burnout, the need for self-care. And the results showed us from the findings that those that had personal development training, they were assertively able to boundary themselves. So they wouldn't take on any extra work that they weren't able for. They would check in with themselves if they were the best person to do the job. Sometimes they got called when they were on annual leave. And they refused to answer, and they refused to do any work during their time off, which we found a lot of the younger students from other universities were inclined to want to please. And so they would do too much and then burn themselves out. So the findings actually were quite interesting around the self-awareness, which was something that they got. I'm just flying down through them now. I'd say my time is nearly out. There was huge transformation for those students. And in terms of their mental health, these students who became graduates were very aware of the dangers of burnout and their own mental well-being. And they would use a lot of contemplative pedagogy, such as mindfulness and meditation and other self-care strategies. And also they were able to recognize when they might be going into triggering situations and avoid that. So their mental health was really, I suppose, much better than their counterparts that didn't have the personal development training. So that's just a flavor. Ask me anything at all that you want. I'm sure my 3 minutes are up, but any questions that you have. And the last picture, I should say, is myself facilitating one of the personal development groups. And I'm sure it's similar around the world, but we have very few males come to social care or social work. But we always get one or two brave souls, and they also have to be treated quite sensitively, particularly if they're younger males trying to open up in a group of women. It's quite threatening. So I'll leave it there. I could talk all night about it, but it's really not my best time of the day at this hour. So I know Diana and Magdalena are in the same situation, but yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm so sorry I didn't realize that so many of you were in Europe and it was so late. That must be why the questions are a little slow to come in. Yeah, I had a question. Yeah, I was wondering if, you know, if you focus on improving like self-confidence in your initiative a lot, because I think like with a lot of the issues that you're talking about, they can often come from a place of like just imposter syndrome and not feeling like you're worth it. So you tend to overwork yourself. Or I mean, I used to do that a lot in my, when I started when I was 18 and 19, because I just felt like I, wasn't smart enough to take time off and care for myself. So yeah, I was wondering if you talk about that or discuss ways to improve that.
Yes, it came up a lot, and employers, our students go on a placement, a work experience for 15 weeks at the end of second year and 15 weeks at the beginning of third year. And their supervisors would say that the confidence that they see in the students that are coming from our university to compare to other universities around the country is so different. They will say that they're the first to get up and put their hand out and shake the hand of a service user or a vulnerable person and say, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm here on placement. Whereas they said the other students they almost need to be given a little gentle push or a nudge to kind of introduce themselves. So what they said, really, what the practice educators, sorry, my brain has gone very slow tonight, but the practice educators would say categorically that even the young students that go out in their work placement, they are saying that they have a maturity level 3 or 4 years ahead of their counterparts. And they would put it down to that piece of personal development.
That's great. Thank you. Oh, we have another question in the chat. Sierra asks, do you have any suggestions for a student to get school administration on board with implementing personal development models?
Sierra, it is a great question. We fight every 4 years, we have a programmatic review, and we fight tooth and nail to keep it. And my research has helped us keep that personal development module going because it is not cost effective for the university. They don't want to pay my salary to have 10 people sitting in a circle. And also they consider it arty-farty, fluffy stuff. It's not the hardcore science. They wonder what we're doing in that room. Do we just cry all day? And you get those kind of comments from people sometimes. So it's really difficult to hold on to it. But sharing my research with them has helped them understand, because they're giving back to the industry, because we partner with the organizations around the university that take our students. And what we say to administration is, those staff that we've trained will stay with the organizations. They are the first to get employment. If there's a social care job or similar coming up, our students, our graduates will always get that job. So we kind of say to administration, it's paying off in dividends. And also the vulnerable people that they work with are getting the best version of that employee that they possibly could.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so I believe the 3 minutes for Q&A is up. So we'll move on to the next presentation. But if you have any more questions for Geraldine, we can ask at the end. Okay, now we'll move on to Paul.
Good evening. I'm afraid I'm another European here, so another late evening, and I've got my headphones on because the kids are asleep upstairs, so I don't want to shout too much. So I want to start by saying thank you to Diana, because there was a phrase that she used, and forgive me for paraphrasing, it was something along the lines of, when you're doing your PhD or when you're doing your postgraduate studies, you only have that experience. That's the only experience you have. You don't know any different, right? Forgive me if I butchered that, Diana, but and I think that's something that we're trying to address in what we're doing here. So we as academics should, at least in my opinion, have a broader view of the way you can do research, the way that you experience your PhD, than our PhD students do, than our postgraduate research students. So not just PhD students, but masters by research and things like that. And while there is a lot of formal support for research students, primarily through supervisory teams, that is primarily focused on the research, of course, right? Guiding the student through the research methods, integrating the scientific community, and so on. Now, there are other support networks that are available for students within universities, whether that's grad schools, which are fairly common in UK universities and I guess elsewhere too, that provide training courses and so on, informal networks such as your peers in your research group and so on. But these typically rely on your personal initiative, right? And if you're not in a position personally, emotionally, whatever the case may be, to be able to seek out those opportunities, then it can become even more difficult. And so the idea of providing pastoral support, which in the UK at least is very common at undergraduate level, seems to be completely absent at postgraduate level. And so this is effectively a point of contact with whom you can talk about, discuss, basically anything that's not to do with your research directly. And so that's what we're trying to do. And what I'm presenting here is in contrast to what everybody else has done, in that this is a proposal that we're getting off the ground. It's not something that we have any results or outcomes from. So what I'd quite like to do today, and reason for attending all of the other talks, is to get ideas, to get some answers about what we can do that will improve or maximize the utility of such a scheme to help our postgraduate students. Because you all know of a wide range of problems that can exist, whether it's problems with your supervisory team, whether it's isolation, even if you do have a good relationship with your supervisory team. I did when I was a PhD student, but there was relatively high amount of isolation because there was little interaction amongst the other people with my research group and beyond. And that can make it quite a lonely place to be. It can be difficult to reach out once you're in a position like that. And so while we're not trying to force people to talk to us as the sort of pastoral support, and we're certainly not positioning ourselves as mental health support because we're simply not qualified to do so, simply having a point of contact who is a member of staff, and so they can have the same access to information and facilities and support that their supervisory team could have. Having somebody who's independent from that, we're hoping will provide another avenue through which our research students can gain support that they may not realize they need, but would be tremendously helpful for their personal development as much as for their research development. So that is it from me. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. We'll just give a few seconds for some questions.
Most of us are tired.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I'm tired and it's only like 6 p.m. for me, so I can't imagine.
Paul, I have a question for you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So, can you clarify for me what sort of support you have in mind? Just maybe
Yeah, of course. So, for example, most at my university, and typically through UK universities, in my experience, most interactions of the student with the institution go through the supervisory team. So whether that's form filling in, whether that's access to resources and so on. If the student is in a position where they either do not feel able to or do not feel comfortable in approaching their supervisory team for issues that are outside of research, or if they have a poor relationship with them such that even approaching them for research things is difficult, then it basically leads to isolation from not just the research process, but then also from any other mechanisms of support that could be accessed through in the institution. And so providing them with another avenue for accessing that information, for accessing that support. That's why we thought it was important that this should be taken on by another staff member who is basically of equivalent level to their supervisory team was an important part of this, because it means that anything that their supervisory team could have access to, they could also get access through their more informal pastoral contact point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying it. Yeah, right.
That's okay. I mean, there's of course a limited amount that we'd be able to do. So it's myself and a colleague who have taken on these, or are taking on these roles rather. And we have, in my School of Computer Science, we have a few research groups. And because each one of us is a member of a different research group, we're basically looking after students who are not in our research group. So we are independent from their supervisory teams in that way. Still part of the same school, but some distance at least.
Can I ask a question, Paul?
Of course.
I'm just wondering, and this is my my timetables, my hat on. Is there hours for the staff to take on this role, or is it solely
No.
a labour of love?
At the moment, it's a labour of love, partly because we have no idea what sort of load is involved in this. I suspect initially it will take a very long time for people to actually realise we're here, even if we send them like hundreds of emails. But we genuinely don't know, because we hear from and about the students who are heavily engaged with the process, with the school, with the academics, and so on. By its very nature, we don't hear from those who are disengaged from that. And so we genuinely have no idea what it's going to be like. It could be very highly variable over the academic year, with different deadlines and so on, and over the years where we get different cohorts of PGR students coming through. I wish I had an answer. That's something that, once we've run this for a little while, I can take that to my head of school and say, look, this is what we're estimating will be the workload associated with this. But at the moment, it's just something we're trying.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think it'd be absolutely super, because sometimes the student might ask somebody that they're not that close to, even about etiquette, stepping on other
Indeed.
people's toes and things like that, or how to,
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to think that this sort of thing would happen naturally within a research group. If you've got a good research group, this should sort of happen anyway. But the reality is that research groups are not always the sort of ideal form that you might expect. And so, in my view, then you can't rely on just people being good to each other, which is, most often the case. Most often is the case, but having something structural in place to mitigate the possible absence of just the kindness of others is necessary.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, any thoughts on how we can do this better? Because like you said, Geraldine, there are so many things that we just simply don't know yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I suppose maybe a trade-off between, if there's two people on the supervisory panel, that one of those people will swap with someone else and be the mentor for someone else's student, and then you'd be the mentor for their student.
Yeah, yeah. So we could do that at some point in future, but I think there are fewer people. I think there's a different role here, right, between being a research supervisor, and that encompasses a whole range of things that are not directly related to research. Of course, you mentioned etiquette, and I think you're quite right about that. That is an important, often unspoken aspect of research when you go to a conference, for instance.
Yeah.
But I think there's a distinctive role to actually providing more pastoral support, in the sense that we provide for undergraduates in the UK, where you're explicitly there to, at the very least, signpost them towards the resources that they probably don't know are there.
Yes. No, I get it. My brain is so slow. That's exactly what you'd be trying to say. I'm so sorry, Paul.
That's quite all right. I hope I'm making sense.
You are, absolutely, but I'm a little bit slower catching up and keeping up.
I had a question. So how many people do you have currently sort of like involved in this right now? Are you looking to kind of like
Um,
expand your team, or is it just a
well,
couple
so
team?
at the moment, so I lead the postgraduate um, program basically in the school. And so what we do is we look at all the forms that students have to submit at various points and go through the paperwork every so often and so on. But that's probably the best place for something like this to go, because there's not much more oversight in terms of PGR processes within universities. It's typically left to supervisory teams, right?
Right.
And so I was just speaking to some colleagues, and the idea actually came from elsewhere. It wasn't my idea. It wasn't our idea. It came from the elsewhere in the university. I'm afraid I'm aware now. But we thought it was a good idea, and we thought it would be worth trying. Like I say, we've not actually started yet. We haven't sent out the message to the students yet that you can contact us. Like I said, I'd hope that students would be able to contact members of staff if they have troubles anyway. But like I said, that's not an assumption that we can make safely, I don't think.
For sure, that makes sense. Yeah. And do you think do you have any like an example? Like, do you have like, are you scheduling like meetings, like one-on-one meetings on like Zoom, or is it like in person, or what are you thinking for the
At the
interactions?
moment, the way we've set it up is that we have either a weekly drop-in session, so
Okay.
people can turn up without appointments,
Mhm.
or contact us to arrange a specific appointment. I think the
Okay.
benefit of having drop-in sessions is that there's no, or at least there's a lower barrier to gaining
Mhm.
access to the person who you want to ask advice from or help from. But equally, given my timetable, my colleague's timetable who's running this with me, that's only going to be a certain time of the week because we're teaching or we're in meetings or whatever the case may be.
For sure.
And that time might not work for the person who needs our support.
Mhm.
So it's certainly not a perfect system. It would be nice to get other people involved, but like I said, I think there's a distinctive role here, and I'm not sure whether all of my colleagues, for instance, would be comfortable taking on the more pastoral role in
Right.
addition to the sort of research supervision, which
Mhm.
is part of the job of being an academic. Um, um, does that make sense? It's an imperfect system,
Yeah.
and I don't have answers really because I don't know how well it works. To be honest, I've heard of like people acting as informal what do you call it, mentors for people.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
people ask for mentors and so on. And I guess we're not trying to position ourselves as explicitly as mentors, um,
Mhm.
partly because we haven't asked to be mentors. We're not certainly not going to impose ourselves on people as we're your mentors. But at the start, at least, we're going to be relatively reactive to see what people will be proactive in making them aware of the opportunity, but reactive in the sense of not actually forcing ourselves on them unless they ask for assistance. Whether that's a good idea or not, I quite
Mhm.
like your opinions, to be honest.
No, I mean, I really love the idea of having, just like a point of contact, because I know, for example, for me in undergrad, there wasn't a lot of resources for mental health
Mm,
for everything, and I remember we had one person for the entire faculty of engineering in undergrad who, if you had issues you could contact, or if you were struggling with
mm,
courses you could contact, and her schedule was super busy, and they couldn't really provide a lot of like the support that they were offering. um
mm.
and I think like there are, our like U of T has mental health. um
Yeah.
they have the wellness center where you can like book appointments and see psychiatry, but psychiatrists, but sometimes it's a little bit more daunting too, because then it's like kind of just like kind of almost already thinking that you have a problem, as opposed to
Yeah,
just
that's right.
having
That's why I
split
quite liked what
yeah.
Diana said earlier. It's like, if that's your only experience of postgraduate research, you've got no other reference point.
Mhm.
And we as academics, having been usually in multiple universities, but at least at multiple stages of the ladder, as it were, the very short, wide ladder, should have a little bit more of a broader perspective
For sure.
that we can use.
Mhm. Mhm. Right, Luana?
I think, Paul, what you say makes an awful lot of sense. I've returned recently from a piece of work in Manchester with about sort of postgraduate research students who had dual supervision because they're on a, very fancy doctoral training center.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
They, quite a lot of additional support. But I was really struck spending a week with them about how the supervisors, of course, in a way, were there to extract the best out of those students scientifically.
Yeah.
But I think it was very clear when we ran some kind of working labs of problem solving of the problems, a bit like along what Geraldine has been doing, kind of very personal development based sort of, let's
Okay.
just solve some of the challenges you are really facing. And some of the things that came up that were somewhat shocking actually was, for example, basics of like, we have a lot of international students and there's a lot of issues to do with hitting the ground running just to get your, rent sorted and a lot of logistical
Yeah.
things. There's kind of no one there to do, or people felt under stress. Then relationships with supervisors were often quite problematic. And then where do you go if your visa is tied to your lab and you're afraid
Yeah.
of hurting, that relationship and sometimes even actually being threatened or bullied. So there were all kinds of different sort of dynamics there. And it was very clear that even though with two supervisors, the setup can be at times worse because each supervisor assumes that the other one's got it covered. And so I got a
Yeah.
sense
Yeah.
that the students are falling kind of in between. And there's a case study on my website of another department we've worked with where I was really struck by how useful psychoeducation of the journey of what a postgraduate research student will encounter, um, what a difference that made. So sort of, literally giving people like a little manual to say, this is your journey. Here are the things that are kind of useful for you to really think about, almost like checklist things, and then saying, come back to things that you might really, need help with or da-da-da. And some of the students, particularly the industry-sponsored students, said, this was a godsend because they were really like dropped in, almost like soldiers into this really strange environment where they didn't know the rules of the industry, and so on. So so I'm thinking that can help. I've worked with departments where there are signposted, postgraduate teaching, mental health aid, all sorts of systems of culture. But strangely enough, in many places, the sense is that they don't often, they can be a point of last resort, but a lot of students still don't feel comfortable in coming on to, voice their issues so much. So you kind of need almost some kind of focus groups or some kind of very well-positioned interventions to really get at the threads of what the challenges are to kind of help equip them. And I did walk away thinking the supervisors could do with a bit more training.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm a supervisor and I welcome more training, but equally, I think it's to expect supervisors to be able to provide the sort of mental health support that some of the students actually would be very beneficial in receiving. I'm not a trained professional in terms of mental health support in any way. But I think that sometimes having that sort of intermediary, because I think it's a big step to say for anybody, including research students, to say, I want to go and seek mental health support from the mental health services at a university. There's quite a big step to do that. So even though somebody like me can't provide mental health support, we could be like an intermediary to, at the very least, like I said, provide that sort of signposting, but also to, in the first case, almost validate that there could be a problem, right? Not necessarily with themselves, that they are the cause of the problem, but like has been mentioned before, that they're an environment that, at the very least, they're unfamiliar with, which is understandable, but at the very worst is, actually damaging to them. And so having some help in, at the very least, acknowledging that, I think could be helpful. It's probably not as far as you're suggesting, Magdalena, perhaps, and perhaps that's as far as we should go. But
Yes.
I'm not sure I can do that.
I think in my experience, doing some training for research leaders, I certainly think that, and Geraldine might have a view on this as well, especially from social care, but my sense is that a lot of the training tends to be often this sheep dipping, information only cognition of that's what it is. And some of the trainings that, for example, I have found far more effective and short have been in relational skills. So really experiential relational skills of, okay, you're going to sit with this student. How are you going to make them feel safe? To open up to you, say something like something's not quite right. How are you going to even out the playing field of that power dynamic? How are you going to use your, you know what I mean? So they're much more practical. And I have a sense often quite a bit of training can be very information led. So you're sort of told things, but you told things got nothing to do with your confidence or ability to do.
Absolutely.
And be really helpful because, as you say, I think a supervisor need not be a mental health professional, but actually a lot of it, speaking like a neuroscientist, I think a lot of it is about getting the nervous system of hyperactivated person just equalized, it just brought into a kind of calm space where people's natural agency with support takes over and actually can do some, really good confidence building. And that could be perhaps, I'm sure Geraldine will have a view, even though it's late for us, but yeah.
I do in some sense. Myself and Yasu Katora, we carried out some research on the social care students, and they were so compassionate about anybody in their sphere that would be suffering from any mental health difficulties at all. But when it came to announcing their mental health difficulties, they said absolutely not. And that they'd be afraid that they wouldn't be considered competent to continue on with their education. So it's really difficult situation because they're afraid that if they tell us that they're struggling with their mental health, that we will look at them as less than or not fully capable. And you can give that talk at the beginning that, coming and asking for help is a sign of strength rather than a sign of weakness. But whether it's heard or not, that's a very different situation.
Yeah, I think knowing that and or being told that and actually feeling that that is the case is quite a big difference. I realize that for myself.
Yes. But even in my own work where I carry out external supervision, we had a CAO set in on supervision of an organization one day with their staff, and they were given permission to say how they were feeling and that they could go to the CEO at any time and say they were struggling a little bit, a little burnt out, or maybe browned out, not quite burnt out. And one of the staff emailed me and said, I went to my supervisor with some issues and she went to the CEO and they have brought me in and basically given her a dressing down, saying that, is she saying she's not up to the job? So it was completely misunderstood. This person was saying, you know, I'm not in the right headspace to work that closely with this particular person. But it was heard as, I'm not able for this job.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one, really.
It is, and I think we're very reliant still on individuals having the capacity for flexibility, kindness, understanding.
Yes.
And there's no systemic support for that in the same way. So if you're lucky enough to have a line manager or colleagues who are understanding, then brilliant.
Yes.
If you're not, well, you're stuck.
Yeah, that's
And
it.
that's it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is too much in a system that depends on lack of the draw of the supervisor. Definitely. I mean, one of the things I was struck by, you know, asking a group of 50 incredibly intelligent people, and I said, you know, what do you understand your supervisor expects from you? And people couldn't articulate this. And I said, well, but you're working with this person. Wouldn't you think that it'd be a good idea to ask, you know, what are some expectations? What, you know, what would you expect? What should I have in 3 months, 6 months, or, you know, how does it all work? And they were so deadly afraid to ask. So, you know, almost like checklists for, you know, students and PIs to have, like, to say, have you thought about having the, you know, it's like the equivalent of, like, I guess, induction good policies for force, but more tailored towards, you know, the kind of research environment and the dynamic of supervisor student can be very helpful, actually, if they are enforced in some sense. Because I guess you know, I've been in places where they are there, but when you ask the research PIs, do they do them? That's a very different story.
Yeah. Absolutely, I agree.
I think when I take on a student, I like to let them know what's expected so that 6 months down the line, they don't get a shock. Why do you want me to have all of this done? You know, and the Gantt chart is great to look at, but it really doesn't that gets forgotten about once the proposal is accepted. You know, so it is really, I think, crucial for us to be very clear on day one what the expectation is and make sure that they're okay with that expectation, make sure that there's wriggle room. I can be very bold sometimes. If I know I'm getting a procrastinator, I shorten the deadlines because I know that the piece I'm looking for is going to be, you know, 2 or 3 weeks late. So sometimes I make that judgment and provide a deadline much earlier than it's needed because it's never going to be met. And we're lucky to get it in that time frame. So there is that piece about getting to know who your student is and how they operate. You know, some of our students could knock out 2,000 words in their lit review overnight. Someone else could take 2 or 3 weeks to do it. So it just depends.
But thank you everyone for your attendance and active participation today.